All right, welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. Here we are for Stories of Practice webinar, System Education Leaders' Role in Developing Partnerships and Navigating Pathways to Support Student Mental Health. We will go ahead with our land acknowledgement. As a provincial organization, we acknowledge that we are on traditional territory, gathering grounds, meeting place and traveling route of the Treaty 6 First Nations, the Cree, the Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Dene, and Nakota Nations. Treaty 7 First Nations, the Blackfoot Confederacy of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani Nations, the Stoney Nakoda Nation of the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney Nations, and the Tsuut'ina Nation. Treaty 8 First Nations of the Cree, Deneta, Dainza, and Denisoli Nations, and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people of the past whose footsteps have shaped this land, and those of the present and future who will continue to shape it for centuries to come. CAS is strongly committed to restoring and honoring the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, and we believe that truth must be acknowledged to move forward to reconciliation. Engaging in respectful, responsible, and reciprocal relationships with our First Nations and Métis communities is the path forward to reconciliation. Together, we call upon our collective communities to build a stronger understanding and relationship of all the peoples who dwell on this land we call home. So, setting the stage, would like to say good afternoon to Danica Martin, CAS Leadership Consultant. Danica, thank you so much for the massive organization that it takes to put these webinars together.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, and thanks to all our presenters this afternoon. And thanks to all the participants who are watching this live or will be watching the recording at a future date. We appreciate the time that you'll spend this afternoon engaging in your own professional practice. And through these stories of practice this afternoon, you will hear woven a variety of competencies from both the LQS and the SLQS. A few are highlighted here, but we know that all of the competencies in those professional practice standards are intertwined. And so we invite you to reflect upon those that resonate with you as you listen to the stories of practice. This webinar is the fourth and final webinar in a series of 4 webinars focused on mental health in schools and supports for student mental health in your school authorities. You can find learning guides associated with all the webinars under the resources section on the CAS website. After all the webinars are completed, those will be uploaded. And the outcome this afternoon is really to look at a system education leader's role in supporting student mental health, with always that goal of ensuring optimum learning for all the students in your school authority. We hope this afternoon you'll have an opportunity to hear and examine and reflect upon system education leadership practices that support and build student mental health capacity in your school authorities and apply these to your own context. Today's webinar is focused on those strategies that school authorities have used to develop partnerships and navigate pathways to service. And these are the guiding questions that our presenters used to design their stories of practice. And I'm excited to have 3 excellent stories of practice this afternoon that I'm sure will resonate with many of you. We know that there's a lot of policy and legislation and procedure that guides our practice. Of particular focus for this afternoon's topic is Section 33 of the Education Act, which requires school boards to provide a continuum of supports and services to students that is consistent with the principles of inclusive education. And so you'll hear many layers of that continuum of supports and services woven throughout the stories of practice this afternoon. In particular, when it comes to developing partnerships and navigating pathways, we know that a robust continuum of supports and services has collaborative structures, it has clearly defined pathways to and from service, it has supports for students as they transition. And certainly collaborative structures exist within most of your school authorities, I'm sure, but just a reminder that there's a variety of expertise, knowledge, and creativity that exists within your local communities. And so considering as you're listening to this afternoon's stories of practice, how you can reach beyond your school authority and start to engage with some of those community partners that you maybe hadn't thought of. Pathways to, through, and from service are, of course, a key component of a robust continuum of supports. And this requires a shared understanding, shared responsibility for creating that seamless link for families and students to navigate towards the supports and services that they might need, be those within the school authority or within the community or even beyond your local community. And certainly educational leaders are responsible for creating and being transparent about those pathways to, through, and from service. And each community is unique, so we know that those look different in every community. And of course, the goal is to remove barriers and allow our students and our families to get the support they need as quickly as possible. The Alberta Education Mental Health Continuum of Supports that was developed in 2021 also emphasizes that concept of pathways to, through, and from services and the importance of seamless links between students and families and the supports that they might need. And they offer some considerations that you might reflect upon in terms of creating those barrier-free pathways for your stakeholders in your school authority. And finally, for your consideration, some of you may be new to your role or new to your communities or moving into a new role in the coming year. And we know that many communities have engaged in collaborative work to map resources within their communities. Sometimes this is called asset mapping or resource mapping. And so just a reminder, if you're wondering about partnerships and possible collaborations within your community, this might be a place to inquire with community partners to see if any asset mapping has been done. And access those asset maps. You might find some partnerships that you hadn't thought of before when you look at those resources. And to that end, I offer just a few additional resources for your consideration, and you'll receive a copy of the slide deck after today's webinar. And so those are there for your consideration. And with that, I will turn it over to Lisa to introduce our next presenters.
First off this afternoon, we have presenters, Dr. Marcy Purdue, who's the Associate Superintendent of Student Services for Chinook's Edge School Division, and Jody Smith, who's the Associate Superintendent of Personnel for Red Deer Catholic Regional Schools. And they are going to share their learning around mental health transition consultants.
Thanks, Lisa. We also have with us Dixie McLeod, and she's one of our partners for McMahon Central. So just want to make sure that we include her in the introductions as well. And Dixie's also our slide gal, so she's going to go to the next slide. So we thought we would start our presentation by giving a good lens around what we are struggling with in our two school divisions together. It's something that Jody and I are calling getting in front of it. We're trying to get in front of this model that we keep seeing happening with behavior of us placing expectations on students, those students having difficulty meeting those expectations. A lot of times it's around mental health, and then the adult pushing still to have the expectation met. And then we're seeing after that, this communication of behavior, mental health challenges, and then we're moving into this reactionary mode. And what Jody and I wanted to do was a mindset shift, looking at mental health in a different way in school divisions, and then supporting that mindset shift with Dixie on side as a community partner. So we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. So we are calling this reframing the problem. We have these two large school authorities where we share communities together. And Jody and I got together and we thought, how powerful would it be if we shared our mental health transition consultants within our communities? A lot of our schools are connected together on campuses. We share very similar communities. And so we thought it would be kind of interesting to have a faith-based and a public board come together. So we are probably between the two of us, 22,000 students. And we were also looking for support for our families. And so we asked Dixie to join us as part of our pilot. And so Dixie has 3 enrichment workers that also support our families at a very specialized level. And the biggest challenge that we were seeing is this reframing of looking at mental health and thinking about it as cognitive and thinking skill deficits that we could assess as educators and then support skill development with, that also then would support our students with their mental health. So we've kind of called it identifying our swim lanes with our systems. So what are the pieces that we can do as educators to support mental health in our schools, even at we're talking about our targeted and specialized level, and then what areas can Alberta Health help us manage as well. So along this pilot, we have managed to create swim lanes with our systems that we think are helping us have that like collaborative model moving forward with our kiddos. The biggest piece that we're looking at is this idea of expectations and matching skill growth. So we've been working quite closely with Dr. Stuart Ablon. He has helped both Jody and I as system leaders build capacity, knowledge, skill, and actually a bit of mindset with our school leaders and then also with some of our staff. So I love the slide that he helped us create, which is looking at like pre-pandemic, we would have skill levels of students that would come in. Most of them would have some level of skill. And what would happen is we would put an expectation on the student, be it a learning expectation or a social emotional expectation. And then our students would build the skill and meet the expectation. Then we would move to the next one and the next one and the next one. And we saw for a majority of our students that this was how they could build skill. But Stuart introduced us to something that is showing us why we are having challenges in our two systems. So what we're seeing is what we're calling a gap in cognitive skills, or sometimes he calls them thinking skills. So we're having our students come in with not the usual skill level that we would anticipate, but a much lower gap. And then we are still setting the same expectation and they're not meeting that expectation. And then we're setting a new expectation on top of that and a new one on top of that. And what we're finding is that our students are missing the actual foundational skills that they need to meet those expectations. And so we are seeing behavior coming from our students as communication. And we think we are actually identifying it incorrectly and calling all of that a mental health challenge. And what we're trying to work on with our partners is we can see this as being cognitive and thinking skill deficits that we can build. And then we have mental health challenges that our Alberta Health partners are helping us with. So Stuart and I have talked about the idea of a learning disability. Stuart knows that, and Danica does too, that I have a pretty severe learning disability. So I'm quite comfortable sharing with my administrators what my profile looks like. And I guess now I'm sharing it with you guys as well. But this would be what it would look like for me, is that I am functioning at a grade 6 reading level. And that would be my skill level. But back in, even when I was in school, if I was in grade 6, my reading level would have been at grade 1. So we, as teachers, we would not say to me, the next thing that you need to do, Marcy, is to read the grade 6 novel study. That expectation, I don't have the skills to be able to be successful for that. So as educators, we're so good at scaffolding that and saying, okay, let's start with intensive word work. Let's make sure you have a best fit book. Let's move into a running record, help you with your decoding skills. And I might not reach the grade 6 novel study. I'm working at my best fit level for my literacy skills. So when we think about a learning disability, I feel like so many of our teachers understand this, and they understand how to scaffold expectations in order to build skills so students can be successful. The place where I think we struggle is when we flip this and think about cognitive or thinking skills. So Stuart has challenged both Jody and me with, well, think about now about, okay, you might not have a learning disability anymore. Now we'll call it an emotional disability that requires specific skill development. So when you have a cognitive skill level that is well before the expectation, What are the actual skills that you need to build in order for students to meet the expectations that we have socially and emotionally in classrooms? And then when do we know that they have built those skills and been successful so that we can then set the next new expectation? And that was the piece that Jody and I were really interested in, was identifying what are those specific skills, and then how could we use our mental health transition consultants to build those skills in our schools. So what we ended up with was a model where we are identifying through an assessment what we're calling the lagging cognitive skills of our students. We also have a mental health assessment that we built together that we're using to get the mental health challenges piece. And our transition consultants then are working individually with our students to build up these skills so that our students can be successful with the social and emotional expectations that are placed on them in the classroom and in the school. On the other arm of this is Dixie's group that is helping us with our families that are struggling in severe family dynamics. So these are the skills. These are the cognitive skills that we are identifying in our pilot project. And what I love is that we have actual data. So at the end of this, we've been collecting data on grade level, on students, on what levels of skills they have, what are the strategies that are successful, and then we're able to present that data to our boards to show how we know this pilot is making impact in both of our school divisions. We're actually able to say, these are the key skill areas that we're seeing our students are struggling with. These are the strategies that we're using to build their skills so they can meet expectations. And at the same time, we're identifying key mental health disorders and challenges that we have in our school division that our students are also struggling with. So for Jody and I, we knew that qualitative data is always important, but we actually wanted to be able to prove to our boards that we could collect quantitative data on our students and this work. So we have a bit of both. And then these were the problems that we put forth to both of our divisions that we are trying to solve. So these are huge system level pieces of system change that we are working through. So this pilot is supporting us with the individual specialized support, but Jody and I, as educational system leaders, these are the pieces that we're working through in both of our systems. We are trying to move our educators and our staff in our schools from, instead of focusing on behaviors and modifying behaviors, we actually want them to focus on problems that students will have around expectations and skills and how they can solve those by skill development. So seeing behavior not as a choice, but seeing it as a signal that's communicating to us that the expectations that we're putting on students are too high because they're lacking specific skills that we know we can develop. The other piece we're working on is solving problems collaboratively with students, not unilaterally without them. So our students are involved in all of these plans. So we are making plans with them. We're identifying their skills. We're showing them what the plans could be presented as, and they are actually giving us ownership around that. We're seeing a huge change rather than the adults making the plans. The students are making them in collaboration. And the big three, which is a work in progress, right, Jody? Which is, we want to move from being reactive to being proactive. So we're looking at identifying what are the students' skill levels, what are their areas that are showing frustration, and how can we build those plans beforehand. So we're getting in front of the problem rather than always being in a reactionary leadership model where we're getting the behavior, we're getting the communication, and then we're actually coming in after the fact and trying to support the problems, the behaviors, the mental health challenges we have. So our big questions we're asking our leaders in our schools is, why do some students respond poorly? And what are the skills that they're lacking? And why do we see these concerning behaviors? And what are the expectations? So the big, I would say, mindset shift that we're right in the middle of, and I can hear it in my school leaders, and I think I can echo Jody that she's hearing the same, is that our school leaders are starting to ask, what expectations are we putting on kids? And do they have the skills to be able to meet those expectations? And if they don't, how can we change that so that we are successful and we are also allowing them to build those skills?
Is this me? I can't see letters.
You're up, Jody. This
I'm
is
up.
Betty.
It's my turn. I just wanted to add one thing to all of those pieces that Marcy was saying. We ended up giving the legging skills actually to our administrators. So we let them go through and kind of mark themselves on it because we all have legging skills. It's not just unique to kids who have behavior problems or who might be very dysregulated. We all have those legging skills, and that was important that our administrators see it as well. And then they were able to help with their counselors to see it. And so it kind of has become a definite trickle effect, like Marcy said, that it is a bigger piece of our vocabulary now, that they're not doing it just to be little rascals. There's something going on. It's communication. So that was important. We looked at bridging our gap between mental health services and the community. That was probably our biggest piece. One of the biggest pieces, hey, Marcy, that we were seeing was it's that accessibility into the mental health services. So what could our teachers saw it or our counselors saw it, they would refer the student would go and the next day they'd be right back. And it would be, oh, there's nothing else, or there's not an appointment for a month or something like that. And we were worried for those students because in our mind, they were our tier 4s, but I understand that at AHS, they weren't their tier 4s. So we needed to have someone who could help hold them until they could get to see someone in AHS, because their job is to look after the mental health. Our job is to educate, but there is that bridge there that we have to kind of meet in the middle, and we needed someone to hold them. That's where our mental health consultants came in. So they would come in and they'd work with them intensively on legging skills. That's what they really, really worked on. And in that time, they'd bridge them into the community to get the supports that they need for mental health. So they were never let go or kind of sitting in that little bit of an abyss as they waited. They always were held and continual work with them. So that was important that we could do that. Then our family school counselors and Dixie and Marcy on the Chinook's Edge side, they would help create that transition with the parents so that the parents were getting that support as well, and they understood the wraparound services that they'd be receiving. So we all kind of worked hand in hand of how we could get the support for them. But the critical piece that we needed, which is what we applied for, was that person that would hold the student until the student got the support that they needed from AHS or any mental health supports, which is what we're seeing the most of, right? Marcy, is the mental health supports that are needed. So thanks, Dixie. To switch our slides. So if you look at our pyramid here, we have different names for people, but you'll see how we kind of work all the way up together. So we have our universal supports that everyone does. And then I spoke about our family school counselors, and Chinook's Edge is a little different. And the school counselors we have at Red Deer Catholic, they would work initially to see if they could help support, because sometimes it's a quick, fast support that's needed, maybe even just a suggestion. They just didn't know where they could go. So sometimes it's just really quick. And then the next level is a little bit more intense. So they might be coming into the classroom to work with that student or to do some evaluations to see it. And then the next ones are mental health transition consultants and McMahon workers. And those would be where we get our little bit higher, more needs, where potentially we're not seeing the impact in the classrooms. Even with that extra support, we're not seeing a difference, and we just need a little bit more support. So that's where our piece comes in. And then obviously at the tippity top is mental health. That's their role, is to be part of that. But I just want to reiterate again, the power has been that we've been together on this. In Olds, they're not Marcy's kids and my kids, they're our kids. And that has been the power, is that even our mental health transition consultants, we're all one, and we work to support all those kids, because they could bounce between our schools at any time, or they could end up at your school at any time. And we want to make sure we're supporting all of the kids and not making such a strict distinction between you're the Catholic student, you're the public school student. And it's been really great. The hardest part is that it's a grant, and you know it's going to end. And that's really hard to keep that going at such a pace, because we know it's coming to an end and we haven't heard anything else. So that's, wouldn't you say, Marcy, that's the hard part right now when we're thinking about the people in those roles. Still me, Dixie? Okay, sorry, I can't see anything. So when we looked at our assessment phase, this is working through our people in our schools first. So SET for Chinook's Edge, counselors, and ILT for Red Deer Catholic. And these are what Marcy alluded to. So this is where they would do the mental health assessment that we created. They'd identify the lagging skills, and they'd identify the unsolved problems. So what is our biggest concern with this student? And how can we work towards coming up with a solution with them? That's the key, with them. Because we were making a lot of assumptions about kids and what the biggest problem was. And I'm going to say most of the time we were wrong. We were very wrong. It was a problem that we didn't even know. We didn't even think about. We're just assuming they're late because of X, Y, and Z, and that's not really the case. Then we always do a collaborative work together. We work with our educational assistants if they're part of it. It's a regulation plan. They just both have different names. Our poor mental health transition consultants had to learn both of our acronyms. And then we would move into the final step with our mental health transition consultants, which really helped support our, our top 2% that we're seeing, the ones that we often will see in those CASA classrooms. This was really supporting across the whole division to give the skills that they all need, and to continue to support them with our mental health transition consultants. So Red Deer Catholic Chinook's Edge, we shared 7, not 7, sorry, we shared 5 mental health transition consultants across the 2 school divisions. So that spread from Black Falls to Rocky Mountain House to Red Deer, and all the way to, Marcy, unmute. Carstairs?
All the way to Carstairs and Cremona.
Carstairs and Cremona. So that covers a lot of children and a lot of families. So it was a great, powerful piece with all of us. And then McMahon did the family enrichment workers. They supported all the families that were part of this in Chinook's Edge. And then we used, like Marcy said, Dr. Stuart Ablon, who is so collaborative and is always willing to have a conversation and to see how he and his staff can help support our division. And Think Kids is his website, and we use that often to pull some data off. He's very willing to share things. It's not he just wants students to have this skill, and educators to understand how to help them.
Thanks, Jody. I'm up. Thanks everybody for being here. So I'm Dixie McLeod with McMahon Youth Family Community Services Association of Central Region. And we are the community partner, with Chinook's Edge and Red Deer Catholic on this project. So just a little bit of history. McMahon's a provincial nonprofit. We've worked with children, youth, and families for the last 50 years throughout Alberta. In Central Region, predominantly our work has been with, children and families who are at very high risk and very vulnerable of child intervention involvement. So they're either already involved with children's services or right on the brink. And then in the past few years, with the rollouts of the family resource networks, then we have started to see more of the preventative side. So we have 3 frontline staff provided for through the project, and their services are provided in the family home with the whole family unit. So our philosophy, kind of coming from a family systems theory, is that, if mom and dad aren't okay, the kids aren't going to be okay. And so we might see the main concern of the child behavior, come through for a referral, but we're looking at the entire family and any untreated mental health within the family home. So we did our, most of the work is completed with mom and dad and kids present. There's been some individual work at times with some youth or some with the parents to then meet in the middle. But we try to catch everybody at one time. And as of the end of March, which is our fiscal year, when I did our annual report, there have been 89 families served to date with 168 children and youth. 38 families had already closed within the project, and their length of service was about 143 days. And that's important because when Marcy and I first started talking about this, my vision was kind of a 3-month, 90-day in-out intensive work in the family home. And it became really apparent that 90 days just wasn't enough, because we would get in with the initial concern, and then, we talk about it like peeling back the layers of an onion, and then we would get to, some of the core concerns and core issues that we're perpetuating through the family home, and need a little bit more time to work on that. So we do service plans for every family, and those are created in 90-day increments. So they're actively reviewed and updated. And those are the family's goals. So when the referrals are coming to us through the social emotional team, the social emotional team also has goals that they would like to, we really hope this kid could, function this way in school, or get here, or mom could have, this communication. But then when we get into the home, we work with the family to create their own goals. What is their current state and what is their desired state? And sometimes those are, from an outside perspective, sometimes those look very simple, right? Like I want my child to attend school. But we've had situations, where we've had little guys, under, below grade 3 level, who have missed months and months and months of school. And the parents just haven't had the ability or the strategies in place at that time to, kind of manage their house in a way to get up and get kids up and fed and out the door. And every one of these situations has definitely had untreated mental health in the home. Depression, poverty, substance abuse. Many of the families that we have served, I would say, Marcy, would be on the brink of children's services involvement. We have made many calls to children's services throughout the course of the pilot. But we've also seen a lot of success with some simple parent education. And I don't say simple in a sense to say it should have been easy, but helping parents, kind of empowering those parents to gain back sometimes their authority as parents, to put in some structures and measures to maybe turn the Wi-Fi off at 11 o'clock at night, so that their 8-year-old isn't on their Xbox all day and too tired to go to school the next day, and walked with them hand in hand through that. So that looked like our staff going to family homes at 7 o'clock in the morning and helping parents wake up kids and get lunches ready and get breakfast in them and drive them to school. It's been going at 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night to help with a bedtime routine, or phone calls or texts from parents kind of at all hours of the day to help keep them regulated, and moving forward and doing what's best for their kiddos. And we've seen a lot of successes. We have there's not enough slides to put them in, but we have dozens and dozens of success stories that we've seen out of these families. And the families themselves, 86% of parents, through assessments that we use, we have a variety of level B assessments that we use with families, 86% of parents' skill increased in addressing the mental health concerns in their home. So that may be their own mental health concerns, their children's mental health concerns, their spouse. And 85% of the parents referred engaged in services and were accepting and followed through on the strategies we put in place. We had several stories of kids returning to school after long stretches of non-attendance, due to adjustments in the home environment and the parenting. We've had many success stories working with kind of zones of regulations with both kids and parents. There's always been lots of folks at school to work with a kiddo on their zone of regulation, but not someone to help regulate dad, who, when he gets a call from the school, loses his absolute mind. And then the school's worried he's going to beat the hell out of the kid when he gets home, right? And so we've done a lot of kind of hand holding in that regard to, help, I would say, kind of rebuild that connection and help parents, through some of their own stories and their own challenges, their own kind of fear of sometimes engaging with the school system, and try to help them see that, the school, wants the best for their kids and also wants the parent to be an active partner in that education. Some of the challenges that, we faced and addressed really have nothing to do with education. Their poverty, it's addiction, terminal illness, things like that. But there are things that are happening in the home that was affecting, kiddos' ability to learn in your buildings, right? And so that extension of service into the home, I think we're very proud of, and has been able to have some unintended educational outcomes as well.
Just a few successes and some barriers. I would say the biggest success is the strength of the partnerships that we've made. Jody and I, we didn't know each other very well before this pilot, and now we're like sisters from other mothers. So we see each other all the time. We connect all the time. It's so helpful for us as system leaders that we know each other and we can reach out around, do you know this kid? Are you aware of this one? What are you doing here? What's your system process for this? So that's been huge. Dixie and I have had connections before this, and so it was lovely to be able to bring her team in and support our families. I can't say enough how thankful Chinook's Edge is that Red Deer Catholic already had a family support network, and they allowed us to take the portion of the grant to support our families with Dixie. So I always appreciate that. I put down another huge success is that through this pilot, we have done a mindset shift in Chinook's Edge, and we've actually invested 3.2 million in changing our student services model for next year that is really focused on the skill development and looking at collaborative problem solving and just seeing kids and supports in a different way. So the pilot itself has changed our whole service and support system, which I think is huge. And then that I love that we are evidence-based. So we looked for something that was evidence-based and research-based to be able to rest the pilot on so that we could move forward in our systems, knowing that we could stand behind the evidence and the research of the implementation of the model that we're using. The challenges, and Jody or Dixie, please chime in. Our biggest challenge is still the transition from our supports to mental health. So that system is still so overwhelmed that we are holding on to students where we also thought that we would be able to do intensive supports within, we thought at the time 10 sessions. And sometimes we're holding on to these students for half a year just to be able to support them. We're worried about the sustainability of the program, like Jody said, and then the staff that would be also connected to it. We don't want to lose any of our people, but we know that we're looking at only a half of a year of employment for them. And then our other big one is the lack of intensive ongoing support and therapy opportunities for our kiddos who truly do have mental health disorders and challenges and need that really intensive therapy that our transition consultants can't provide.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Marcy, agreeing with all the successes and challenges, but also just the complexity and the fact that I think we find ourselves treading a line of working out of scope, quasi regularly, because we still see a lot of gaps for family services, where I'm quite familiar with the children's services legislation, in working in the system for the last 20 years. And there's still gaps where, that it doesn't meet legislational criteria for child protection involvement. But there are kids and families at significant risk on a daily basis, with, some pretty significant adverse childhood experiences, and just the trauma and the cumulative impact of that. And I think that we've seen ourselves hanging on to families as well, that there's no other service. They don't meet, no one can kind of come in and swoop them and their kids. And I've often said through the years, we just need foster homes that will take entire families instead of removing kids from a family. of origin, but, parents that are struggling to such an impact that daily, kids are just exposed to traumatic behaviors and instances. And so we still see that gap. This grant has, allowed us to, hang on to those families for a little bit and try the best we can to connect them, with any interim supports. But, I'm not sure what the answer is to solve that, but we still see it very clearly.
And Lisa, I'm not sure if you want us to do the questions, but these were the two that we had. One was around just supporting a mindset shift in our educational systems around mental health supports. And the other one was, how can we continue to leverage partnerships to support mental health in our schools? Those were the two questions we had.
Yeah, Danica, I'm not sure what our time is like, but it would be great to see if we could share some of our thoughts. That was such an excellent and thorough presentation, and some really good questions that maybe we can take some time to talk about before we move on to the next presenters. So if anyone has any thoughts on either of those questions, I suppose, and wants to take a shot at sharing some ideas around those two really, really difficult questions that I'm sure we're all grappling with, feel free.
I think I see Felicia has a question, maybe. Felicia?
I loved this presentation, and I am working on a First Nation right now. And I just think the way that you talked about staying with the child while you're waiting for partnerships and services to actually support that kid, that was awesome. And that the grant covered that kind of actual position is a really just, it's that warmth, that warm, supportive person who's really got that deep attachment. That's awesome. I just have a little answer for the second question that you posed, and I'm really passionate about this. But supporting mental health in schools, we could do a much better job, I think, within education of working towards partnerships and services and funding that gets us at those protective factors. So a lot of times in education, we get really attracted, and you guys touched on it, to those downstream approaches, that crisis response, because we can pat ourselves on the back and go, we're hitting all those, tier 4 pieces. But when we protect our schools and we find that funding and those partnerships for those universal supports, whether that's, gardening and walking, and we talk about this in education, but we oftentimes aren't as high five to our teachers who are writing those grants to keep kids outside, to keep them with physical literacy, to keep them eating healthy. Those universal protection strategies, that is mental health. That's not, pathologizing and getting into mental illness. And so that was my answer to the second one, was we have to really make sure we celebrate and protect all of those staff people in all those districts that are doing that proactive mental health promotion stuff really well. And thanks for your presentation.
Thank you, Felicia.
We've been talking about that second question a lot in Prairie Rose as well. And, it feels like when you have a child in crisis, no matter where you turn, you're facing barriers and hoops to jump through and reasons why other services can't be put in place. And that can be a really frustrating and isolated place to be. And so we've just made some subtle shifts. So for example, when we're having our school leader meetings or our learning support teacher meetings, talking to teachers in shifting the focus, like Felicia mentioned, to joy and stories of success, and that narrative around, so along with all those ACE scores, there's lots of interesting conversations happening about the positive childhood experiences and how maybe we can use those proactively as well, just to help our colleagues not feel like they're in a pit of despair when it comes to supporting the really complex mental health issues that come I'm really jealous of the framework that you put in place, and I'm excited to read more about it and see if there's things that we can copy for our school district.
Thanks, Lisa. I know exactly what you mean. I kind of call it the post-pandemic haze that, you know, we came out of the pandemic and our focus has been on so much of the impact of that on our students' literacy, their numeracy, their mental health. And so we have like sort of matters committees where teachers can voice concerns, ask questions to the superintendent team. And like I've just noticed since we've started this mindset shift and this new model, the questions have turned around from being really reactionary and really emotional to being a little bit more proactive and more like what Felicia was talking about, of focusing on those preventative measures rather than always at the top of the emotional scale of being reaction, because it's exhausting and you do feel quite helpless that you can't come up with what the solutions are for it. So I appreciate everything you said, Lisa, everything.
Lisa, I just echo some of what Marcy said, and that mindset is the critical piece, which Carol Dweck's talked about forever, but it does make a difference if you have that growth mindset too, because then you can see possibilities. And with the model with Ablon, it's all about possibilities. So it doesn't make you as frustrated sometimes, and you see that what you could do.
Yeah, the one slide that had all of those lagging skills right there, clearly articulated, you could almost feel how much that would open up potential in conversations. I loved that slide. Any other thoughts, questions, feedback before we move on to our next presentation? All right, moving right along. Next team up is the PWPSD Wellness Team. Introducing Sean O'Shea, who's the Assistant Superintendent of Learning Services. Megan Stevenson, who's the Outreach Team Lead and Mental Health Therapist. And Ashley Mercer, Mental Health Professional Team Clinical Supervisor. Welcome. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you very much. We're honored to be here. Thank you to everyone that presented. The previous presentation was excellent, so thank you very much for sharing. Really enjoyed it. I'll just do a little bit of an introduction. I won't go too much into detail, but Megan and Ashley, really fortunate to have them on our team. Their skill set and their community connections have really allowed our team to kind of develop and grow a lot. So, you know, having their expertise in our division has really helped our team. We have some really great educational minds, but them coming in with a wellness and a mental health background has really allowed our team to go to the next step. So they do oversee and lead our wellness teams, which includes about 30 team members, all totaled from tier 1 to tier 4. So we've been able to really grow that team over the last little bit. So next up, I just want to get you situated with our division, give you a little bit of information about Peace Wapiti and where we are. So we are located in the northern part of the province. We are northwest part of the province, and we serve about 62 to 6,500 students. We serve the area around Grand Prairie, so a large geographical area, and our schools actually have a lot of diversity. We have schools close to 800 students, and then we have schools all the way down to about 70 students. So quite a range in terms of student population. And then the further out you get from our center in Grand Prairie here, the more difficult it is to access resources, of course. Some of our more remote communities are just the school. There isn't much more to the hamlet or the town than the school and maybe 1 or 2 buildings. So we have quite a diverse area. We also serve some First Nation school within our division, Horse Lake, so we work really closely with them when we can. We have about 1,200 full-time staff. 400 of those are teaching staff inside of our district. So we've been working towards revising and revisiting our mental health focus over the last 8 to 10 years. But over the last 4 or 5, it's really started to take off. So that said, I'll kind of turn it over to one of my colleagues, and Ashley will give a little bit more background on where it all began.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley Mercer, and thank you for having us. We're really excited to be here and share a bit about our journey. So I think it's important to share our journey and how we got here and how it all began. So as many of you know, in 2020 was a difficult year for many. With the pandemic in full swing and a major government change, many were left without jobs, and that included myself. At this time, the North had a regional service collaborative delivery model where school wellness supports and funding was allocated and shared amongst several school divisions in the North. And in 2020, with funding changes, mental health professional supports were now being directed back to the school and were considered the school's responsibility and left to each independent school division to do what they felt necessary. I was lucky, as Peace Wapiti Public School Division didn't hesitate. They knew the importance of supporting students' mental health. And with that, I was hired as the lone mental health clinical supervisor nearly immediately to start building. We didn't know what our wellness team would look like, but we started building and in the air, so to speak. I think it's also important to highlight that there were many things that helped us get off the ground and on the right path. We would not have been able to build such a robust mental health wellness framework without the work of Dr. Stan Kuchner and mental health literacy. Together, we were able to use their work to lay the foundation of wellness supports in Peace Wapiti. Everything we do, we filter through their lens to help build and promote wellness for all in our schools. And I think it's also important to note that we don't make decisions independently. We have a wellness steering committee that is comprised of, it's a collaborative model and it's comprised of multiple different staff. So 5 principals, 2 vice principals, all the leads of the wellness team, an executive, a member from the executive team. We have our school psychologist who attends, our Alberta Health Services partners who work in health promotion, our FCSS county partner, and we have on occasion we invite our partners and invited guests to come along into our steering committee, and the purpose is to be collaborative and to have a model that we hear, the educator's perspective, we hear the community's perspective, we hear, from the mental health team and the school's perspective, to really try to gain a multidisciplinary collaborative perspective to guide our wellness framework in our schools. We're pretty proud of this diagram. We used to have an older model that wasn't as, we call this Peace Wapitizing. And I did not create this. I'm not the IT person behind this, but we have some pretty brilliant supports that helped us create this model. So as you all know, not every student requires therapy or intervention, as the previous team had alluded to. The Wellness Tiers of Intervention is a model to help students, staff, and families understand the different level of supports and services that are available to them inside and outside the school. While it's not a comprehensive list of all the community supports available, it does highlight some of the services that are the most available to them. The wellness team uses the tiers of intervention to help determine the best service for each student need. We use this model to help triage referrals and get students in front of the right people. The model is made up of 4 tiers and is in line with the language that is set out in the mental health literacy curriculum. We'll go through each tier briefly, starting with the Indigenous education team. On the right side of the triangle, you'll notice in pink, the Indigenous education services team. At Peace Wapiti Public School Division, we understand the importance of honoring and promoting Indigenous content in our classrooms. The Indigenous education team can help with curriculum support, build presentations alongside teachers, share resources, and PD opportunities. As you can see on the tiers of intervention model, the Indigenous education services team can help supportants who have been identified as being in any one of the tiers. They have been able to connect students and families with community resources, culture, and assist them to funding supports. They also join the conversations at our CRM meetings, consult with staff, share perspectives, and lead cultural activities. Next, we'll discuss the Tier 1 team. That is our mental health capacity building team. And they offer the very important supports that I believe Felicia talked about, the universal supports to all students. So they promote universal and targeted programming to promote positive mental health, both inside the classroom and within the community. They offer lots of summer programming in our community. Next, we have Tier 2 community school liaison counselors, and their goal is to promote universal wellness supports and or one-on-one or group connection-based supports to students who experience short-term mental health distress or problems, including stress, adjustment problems, or situational life stress. Examples could include, but are not limited to, supporting a student through parent separation, divorce, grief and loss, and or emotional regulation struggles. The next is our Tier 3 mental health professional team. That's my team. Our mental health therapist provides school-based individual therapy sessions and interventions for students who have been identified or have been suspected as having a mental health problem and or disorder that is impacting their ability to be successful at school. Common examples of mental health problems and or disorders that our therapists support are students experiencing ADHD, anxiety, depression, autism, high-risk behaviors such as self-harm and or suicidality. To give you an understanding of numbers, our mental health therapists currently see 118 students, and there are approximately 10 on a wait list. We do have exclusionary criteria that include, we do not deal with sexual abuse, eating disorders, or mental health illness and impairment that impact all areas of functioning where they are best served with Alberta Health Services Children's Mental Health, or PACE, for example, our Sexual Assault Crisis Center. So we don't support those issues in school because we do believe we think that they should be met outside the school and are best supported in that way. And so we do our best to work with the families and the students to get them to the appropriate supports and resources. And so that's a little bit about the first 3 tiers. And next, Megan will discuss the Tier 4 supports in Peace Wapiti.
Hi. So at the top of our pyramid, as you can see, we actually have our Tier 4 supports. So we have 2 teams that function at our Tier 4 level. That these are for the students or families that require that higher level of specialized support. So the first team is our PCS rehabilitation team. That's made up of our speech and language pathologists, our psychologists, occupational therapists, supports for the deaf and hard of hearing, or any other specialized team to support students. Our second team that offers service at this Tier 4 level is our Peace Wapiti Outreach team. This is the newest team to our division. This is our grant-funded program, and I'll be going into greater detail about outreach, but how it fits within our tier is we provide support to students where a mental health disorder or illness has been identified by either our Tier 2 or Tier 3 supports, and often identified that community supports are needed. So some of the jobs that we do at Outreach is to be able to connect then our students, those identified students, with those outside supports. And some of those that we typically access are AHS, Children's Mental Health, Psychiatry, PCHAD, CASA, those types of community supports. So let's talk more specifically about outreach. As you can see, we obviously have a multitude of supports at Peace Wapiti through our tiers of intervention. Prior to the development of our Tier 4 outreach team, we had actually struggled with what I heard the last presentation was speaking our language too, of how do we actually connect those students. What we were seeing is that we would identify students with struggles, we would make some referrals or recommendations to parents, and what we found is that these referrals were being made and that there was little follow through. So a few years ago, our wellness team leads were asked to brainstorm, like, how can we solve this? What's the solution? Because we kept seeing students and families that just were continuing to fall through the cracks. What we also noticed, similar to you guys before us, was that post-pandemic, we were seeing a large drop in attendance and an increase in truancy, and more students and families just becoming more disconnected than ever before. So our statistics showed us that in the 2019-2020 school year, Peace Wapiti had approximately 7% of our student population in grades 1 to 12, where there were some major attendance concerns. Following the pandemic, not surprisingly, these numbers for the 2021-2022 school year increased substantially to actually 13% of that same population having some real attendance concerns. So it was here that our wellness team leads came together and started to dream. We brainstormed asking, like, what would help? How can we solve this? How can we help our students and families with the follow through? As a team, we thought, wouldn't it be incredible if we had a team of social workers who could come in, who are trained to help bridge those gaps between schools and our greater community? A team with knowledge of systems and resources that could go beyond the four walls of the school to connect students and families to the services that they need most. So this is where that dream started, and that's exactly what we did. So our Peace Wapiti outreach team is obviously entirely grant funded. Our focus is to provide that direct support to disengaged students and families who are the least likely to access services, but they're the ones who we know are the most in need. So our outreach team is made up of 4 social workers. So myself as the team lead and 3 outreach caseworkers who carry a caseload of about 200 families per school year. So that's all together. We view each family as a unit, and each caseworker works to support the family as a whole. So often that results in, we might have a family of say 7 people, and we see that the family is a unit, but then are often helping to support individual things for each family member. The foundations, the addition of our team of social workers at tier 4 actually allows for that wraparound support that we talked about earlier. That's not always been possible. So we can provide support through individual or family referrals to agencies, often through relationships that we already have as social workers in the community. We can provide transportation to both students and families when needed. So sometimes that's driving them to appointments, picking them up, ongoing follow-up, and that supportive follow-through to be able to support the ongoing connection. The foundations of our outreach team are based on principles of trauma-informed and strength-based practices. We're voluntary. We recognize that our success lies in the relationships that we actually create. And that's with Peace Wapiti staff, students, and families, and with also those community resources that we access time and time again. We understand how important those relationships are. Our goal is to re-engage the disengaged student learners and their families and assist in reconnecting them to environments in their community. What we found is that this looks very different for every family, and our approach varies to meet individual needs. What we know is that when we address those systemic barriers, so those basic needs, poverty or economic barriers, access to healthcare, housing struggles, food insecurity, and disconnected community service agencies, that what we see on the other side is better outcomes for students at school. We see that many of the families, students and families who are struggling also have limited knowledge of what services exist. I don't know about your communities, but ours are constantly changing. The people who work in them are constantly changing. Those connections we have are often changing. And families don't know who to talk to, how to access them, or how to do that successfully. And then they struggle to follow through on recommendations that are made by those carrying authority figures, and just don't know how to do that. Our outreach model recognizes this and decreases the first barrier by meeting those families in places where they feel the most comfortable, which is often at home. It's out in the community, it's in coffee shops or community agencies. What we know is that this helps them to feel more comfortable, and it starts to rebuild that trust with parents, which in turn opens the doors to better supporting the students. So what you may be asking is, so what does that actually mean? What do you actually do for outreach on a day-to-day basis? We get that question a lot. And the truth is it looks very different. But what we do is, first we work closely with Peace Wapiti staff to identify students and families who are struggling. So the teachers, the administrators, they know best. Our first contact with the family is that first attempt to build that rapport and trusting relationship where we identify their needs, their barriers or struggles, and then start to see where we can plug in and support that access to supports. Because our outreach team has the ability to go beyond the four walls of the school, we often joke that we show up and we knock on doors and often have to show up again and again and keep knocking on doors. And then at that first meeting, all we're doing is offering a listening ear, sometimes a coffee, and that this is when we see the walls come down for families and their trust begins to rebuild. Many of our families tell us that even just that act of going out to them and continuing to go out to them really opens that door to start building trust. And what we often hear parents say is, we really wish somebody had come out sooner. Typically, when our outreach team has been involved, we've seen an increase in parent involvement right after our first contact. So we engage in holistic case management with families. We view the family unit as a whole. We know that healthy parents equal healthy families and healthy children, and that this means meeting them where they're at, identifying their needs, and providing support for that physical, emotional, social, and spiritual well-being, and letting them guide what that looks like. We help to bridge those gaps between Peace Wapiti and the families and some of those barriers that have been impacting students. Sometimes that means that we're attending meetings with administration or staff and supporting the family to advocate for their needs, or at times, sometimes providing that mediation support to help facilitate that respectful and meaningful dialogue when relationships have been strained. Our roles as outreach workers look different. Sometimes this is attending an intake appointment at mental health and addictions with a student or with a family. It's attending AHS addictions appointments with the parent. At times we provide transportation or work to access funding for basic needs. We help translate government forms such as AISH or FSCD, and sometimes we assist to complete them. We find that often parents, they get referred to these different government agencies and they just have no idea what to do from there, and they feel ashamed. They feel great shame when they don't know how. And when we have teachers or principals, well-meaning individuals saying like, did you get those forms done? And that they're at home and it's causing insurmountable stress for them. So we help them through that. We provide advocacy, support, and modeling of advocate behaviors to students and families to help them identify their needs and learn the skills to ask for them. So helping them stay regulated in meetings and coming back to the principal's office or a community center where maybe they've had some struggles with relationships. We provide support for those transitions. So that's both between Peace Wapiti's school environment, so maybe from one school within our division to another, or some of those bigger life transitions. So maybe a mom needs help accessing a rehabilitation facility, or an auntie needs to know where they can pick up those guardianship papers. And so we can actually take them there. We can show them, and we can do that warm handoff to those people that we already have pre-existing relationships with. We try our best to be community experts. We find our families or teachers just don't even know who's who out there. So we help to identify who's who, and then again, do that warm handoff. We also provide ongoing consultation and support for Peace Wapiti staff. We participate in team meetings and help to provide consultation and brainstorming for students and families who are really struggling. So we attend community high-risk youth meetings and advocate for our students there. And we find that as social workers, we often bring a different perspective to the education table. Poor Sean, we always joke, like, we're just social workers living in an educator's world. And so often we have lots of good conversations where our perspectives may differ, but we come to the table to figure out a plan that works for all of us. Above all, our goal with outreach is to build long-term resiliency in our Peace Wapiti students and families. We believe and we know that when we help students and families to access their natural supports, that these relationships, those extend far beyond our school's role and our outreach team, and that will actually result in that long-term resiliency that we want for our students and family well beyond them attending school. The success of our school wellness teams would not exist without first acknowledging the foundations of support that we have in place to support our workers at all levels, right? So our tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4. So Ashley's actually going to speak to some of the clinical consultation and foundational work to support our wellness staff members.
We often get asked, like, what do you guys do? How do you operate? You know, what guidelines and practices do you use? So I thought we would take some time to share some of the important clinical pieces that we use in our day-to-day practice. So in order to work collaboratively and get students in front of the right people, it's important to develop foundational practice to help guide us. First, we had to develop a referral, an intake, and a triage system that is based on that tiers of intervention model. Over time, we've had many challenges and many triumphs. We continue to work hard to fine-tune the triage model and build its efficacy. As you all know, there are many things that can arise day to day in a school. Managing risks is a major component of supporting safe and caring schools. To help mitigate and manage risks, we have guidelines that we've helped develop to assist us in dealing with suicide, sexual abuse, crisis response, and violent threat risks. Our wellness team also provides ongoing staff training to help increase capacity amongst students, staff, and families. We often will attend, whether it's a school council meeting or we'll have parent nights. We do lots of different things as a team. We're currently in the beginning stages also of developing a plan to support staff wellness by learning ways to cultivate a culture of psychological safety in our schools. As legendary management consultant and writer Peter Drucker says, culture eats strategy for breakfast, which I heard that at a CAS presentation last year, which is true. So culture exists in our schools, whether we want to admit it or like it or not. And so we know that psychological safety is key to help create safe and caring schools for all, and we're working really hard to develop a plan for that as well. Oh, no, back. Perfect. As a clinical supervisor, I understand the challenges of being a mental health therapist in a school as I do that job alongside of my lead position. It's incredibly important to build in clinical supervision weekly to ensure mental health therapists feel supported and have the time to debrief and consult about challenging situations that they face. Treatment planning is also a very important part of our job. As a mental health therapist, it's important to have goals and tasks and outcomes identified, as the previous team had mentioned as well, to ensure evidence-based interventions are being implemented and to increase accountability for the important interventions that we do offer. As mentioned several times already, the wellness team prides itself on having great community partnerships. We work hard to invite our partners to the table and work together. We believe that we've had great success in working with Alberta Health Services Mental Health and Addictions, Child, Youth and Family Services, RCMP, and our local YMCA Alternate to Suspension program. We're incredibly grateful for our community partners and will continue to work hard to foster those partnerships going forward.
Great. Thanks, you guys. So we have had some barriers and challenges over the time, as you can imagine. I'll just highlight a couple of them. One was our wellness model fitting into an educational setting and the shift that comes with that when people join our system from, let's say, Child and Family Services. There's often a shift in learning and a different approach model that comes with that. So we've experienced a little bit of learning as a result of that. The other piece is that as our teachers become more informed about wellness practices, sometimes we have really good intentions, good intentioned people stepping outside of their area of expertise and taking on larger roles around wellness than they should be. So I'll just highlight one example. For years, we've had a school-based counselor at our schools, and they've often had a lot of latitude and leeway to step into areas that they weren't trained. So what's happened over the years is we've had some good intentioned people inadvertently causing some harm. So we've been trying to intentionally put in supports for them. At the start, I talked about our geographical area. It is a bit of a barrier. Windshield time is a real thing for us. Resources are finite and there's only so much of our team to go around. So we've had to be strategic in how we overcome those things. And then we've seen a real increase. It's a positive, but it has come with challenges. We've seen a real increase in our parents engaging and wanting to find out information about our wellness team. It's really positive. It's a great thing. In addition to that, our staff are also reaching out to our wellness team. So even though our wellness team started with a really narrow focus around students and how we support students, that focus is growing now to include parents, administrators, teachers, and our team's time management is obviously something we've had to talk about. So they are good problems, but they are barriers. And for us, one of the largest is just ongoing funding. Our board of trustees has been incredibly supportive and is actually continuing to fund our program without the grant next year. So that's exciting. But there just is not enough dollars to continue the work that we would like to do. So those are just a few of the barriers and challenges that we faced along the way. So we do talk about a few things as a team. So while there's always barriers and reasons not to try something new, we have to take a step. We have to move forward. And it kind of goes back to that point that Megan and Ashley were starting with at the start, is that we have very much built as we grow and learn, we continue to add and build and develop. So that's where our wellness steering committee comes in. They continue to provide a lot of really good advice and sage wisdom in the room together. But we've had HR issues as we try to attract people, and there's different grids in different government departments, and we try to attract them to the education. And, you know, holidays are different and vacation days are different. So some of those things that you don't naturally think of until you're in the hiring process have happened. The other thing is, you know, we started, as I alluded to at the start, about 8 to 10 years ago, really tried to explore a model that worked for us. And we've learned and developed over time, but nothing happens overnight. It all takes time. And for us, it's really been a journey. So we celebrate our successes, but we really acknowledge those areas that we took missteps, and we kind of celebrate those as badges of courage to continue to move forward as well. So the other thing that underpins, and we talked about culture, but that's something that we feel is really important. Ashley mentioned psychological safety. We've really worked hard with our administrator groups to develop what is psychological safety, what do psychologically safe environments look like, because that underpins a lot of this work that we're doing and helps reduce that stigma. So that's been important, but so is collaborative response. We have a really robust collaborative response model inside of our district, and that helps underpin a lot of the conversations at the school level and contributes directly to that culture piece. So I'm not sure if this is all of us as a team or if I'll just take the lead on this one, but we've had a lot of really positive successes, and each of the leads in our team can speak to successes. I'll just highlight a couple that stick out to me, and they're more anecdotal for me. I can certainly go into the stats, but right away when we started this, we engaged with some of our administrators, and our administrators said to us, pretty much universally, that these students, this population of students that Megan talked about, are the ones that are driving up the stress factor at the school sites. That principals inside of their school sites don't have the tools and capability and expertise to help these families, but these students continually come back to the school, and they were finding it really challenging to meet these parents where they needed to be met inside of the course of their school day. There just wasn't the time, there wasn't the expertise. So this team coming on board has really helped to reduce the overall stress level. I won't say eliminate, but reduce the overall stress level of our administrators and teachers when they're dealing with some of these really complex students and their families. Overall, what I've seen as a previous administrator and now in this role is that these families that require this amount of support really don't know where to turn. Often the relationship with the principal may become adversarial, not intentionally, but the principal is trying to follow up on attendance. They're trying to follow the attendance processes. But meanwhile, this family isn't at a place where they can entertain those conversations. So it's leading to strained relationships, which is leading to frustration both for the school and the principals. Another thing that I wanted to really highlight here is our team really, Megan, jump in, but I want to say within the first month, we received a referral to a school or for a family. The team went out, and really right away, there was a student in that home where mom was not meeting her mental health needs, wasn't able to get to appointments. The young lady was in grade 1, or the young child was in grade 1, hadn't attended school for a significant period of time, had a lot of dental work that needed to be done. So there was some shame around that piece. Please jump in, Megan, if you'd like to. So Megan and her team went out and were able to facilitate, getting to appointments, getting dental work done. And as a result, that student re-entered school. The relationship with the school principal and that parent really improved dramatically. And we were really able to take some really positive steps for for that family and those students. So we have, just like each of you, I'm sure, have so many of those kind of anecdotal stories, and we've really seen them from kindergarten to grade 12 with this team. So I very much appreciate that. Another success for us, and I'm not sure if everybody's experienced this across the province, but we're actually seeing some greater participation from government agencies. We've actually had some really positive meetings with Alberta Health Services in a lot of areas. They've really come to the table as a full-fledged partner, which we really appreciate. The other one is Child and Family Services. Megan and Ashley have really great contacts, so we've been able to work with them in a way that I haven't experienced in my 20 years as an administrator. So for me, that's been really refreshing. The other piece that's been a success for me, and then I'll let maybe Ashley and Megan talk about a couple, is that we've really tried to work with our staff around staff wellness, and we've engaged with Dr. Kendrick out of the University of Calgary. Our stats that are coming back from our staff are encouraging and quite positive. Because of the work that these wellness teams are doing out in their schools, they're going out and directly and indirectly training teachers how to respond. So when we look at our tier 1 interventions, we're building capacity in the teachers, and that's helping reduce their compassion fatigue, really increasing their job satisfaction and giving them some better tools and giving them an outlet where they feel they can actually access expertise in the building. So it's been really quite positive for us. Our board is supportive because of the hard numbers and the data that we bring back to them, and yeah, we're very happy. So is there anything you guys wanted to highlight on successes?
Yeah, I speak a little bit to them here. Sean, thanks for that. You know, we always struggle as a team because there's so many stories, just like the last presenters, there's so many stories of resiliency and where families have really overcome so much. And we're really a small piece of that puzzle. But we struggle with that because, you know, so much of those stories are theirs. And so it's trying to find that fine line. But what I can share is, you know, some of the successes that we've had is we've been there to listen to the needs of families, the struggles, the triumphs. We've been at the table when principals have been so incredibly frustrated, at their wits' end, losing sleep. You know, staff are showing up to work, feeling worried for the safety of children, the worried about families meeting their basic needs, and just feeling tired and helpless. And I think that that's what we've heard, and that they have been burning the candle at both ends, trying to support these families and worrying about them. We've been there when we've been able to show up and to help to connect them and to take some of that off of their plate, right? We've been there in moments where a father admits to not being able to provide food for his family, the vulnerability of that, or a mom has cried from embarrassment because even though those supports or connections keep being made, or those referrals, that she just doesn't actually know how to navigate those systems, and then becomes so anxious that she just can't even come back to the school. We've seen an increase in attendance for students when our wellness team has been involved and our outreach caseworkers have gone out and created those relationships. I think I feel most proud of some of those collaborative relationships that with those community agencies that we work with. We've established a really incredible mutual partnership with, it's called My Love Pack. I think it exists throughout the province of Alberta, but certainly up in Grand Prairie here, we've been really lucky, and we will often support some of their events. And in turn, they help to provide some of those basic necessities for students and families. They've been able to recently buy a washer and a dryer for a mom who had has a child who struggles with toileting and has some pretty extreme disabilities that it's like laundry 5 times a day, and she doesn't drive. So, you know, some of those situations that's mutually beneficial. Those collaborative relationships, we know, will continue for the families, those connections beyond our team. We know that we're a small piece of the puzzle, and our hope is to be able to come in and establish those. And I think that when we look at the long-term impacts of our families, that we know that even if they have one face, even that was willing to go out to them and meet with them in some of their most vulnerable moments, that they will return. And that we know that schools are now seen as more than just education, but they're seen as hubs of support for the community, and that we really want to build that. our focus is on supporting students and families, but what we found is that we've actually accomplished so much more. And I think that's what we are the most proud of. So with that, we continue to build our airplane, and it's not perfect. And we still learn, and we're still working on it, I think is the message that we want to send.
Just looking at time, we did want to share a couple things that you could take away. So if you follow this QR code, there's access to our outreach team's brochure. We would hope to add another document, so there may be another document there shortly. But take a look, there's a couple things that you can take away, and we really, and you'll see it in our questions next, just being cognizant of time. We're really hoping for kind of a robust conversation. So we appreciate this forum. So thank you again, Danica, and to the people that are presenting today. One of the things we would like to do is really have a conversation at some point. You know, how do we keep this work going? There's a lot of divisions that are having similar focuses and similar successes, but how do we continue this really valuable work going forward? So we're hoping for a bit of a conversation, but just because of time, that's what that first question was. And then our second question really does deal with the realistic natures of financial constraints. Our budgets this year are really tight. So how do you deal with that reality in your divisions? Clinical supervision is something that we pride ourselves that we have in-house. So we're really curious about other divisions, how they might do that in-house. And then how do you build that capacity and efficacy inside of your teaching staff going forward? So those are some of the questions that we were going to pose, but I see we're pretty tight on time. And then just thank you so much. There's my contact information on our last slide. So again, we would love to work with other divisions. Feel free to reach out. We are kind of an open book. We'd love to share. We don't believe in reinventing the wheel. So if we can share something that you can tweak or change and then use, we would love to share. And thank you again.
Thank you so much, Sean and Ashley and Megan, for sharing the work that you've done to support your students. That is so thorough and well thought out and intentional. And it sounds like it's been really exhausting, but useful work. Okay, so yeah, if we have time at the end, we can go back to those reflection and connection questions and maybe have some time to discuss. Karen Rancier sends her regrets today. They are, I think I mentioned before, they're in mediation with their QP employees, so she cannot be here. But Kathleen Lane from EdCan is here, and Kathleen and I will present quickly on some things we've been doing in our division.
Amazing. Thank you, Lisa. So I'm Kathleen Lane. I am the Executive Director of the EdCan Network, and we partnered with Prairie Rose Public Schools and Horizon School Division to co-design a professional learning experience for the school leaders in the two school divisions. So Sean, Ashley, and Megan really commented on the connections between staff well-being and student well-being in their presentation. And the approach we embraced for our mental health in schools pilot project looked at this idea, this important connection between the well-being and looking at how do we support the well-being of leaders to create those safe, caring, welcoming school environments. So as we were conceptualizing the project, both Horizon School Division and Prairie Rose Public Schools had really strong connections with the community to provide a continuum of supports to the services or to the students. And the two divisions wanted to take a more proactive approach in supporting student mental health and well-being by really focusing on the school environment. And as we were designing the project, this quote here on the screen, "The health and wellness of our leaders is what separates a mediocre school from a great school." And this quote came up during the design process, and I'll get into that part of it in just a moment. So to begin with, what is the generative listening experience? It was a co-designed professional learning cohort program to build principals' capacity to shape safe, welcoming, caring, and inclusive school communities. And we had three goals of the project. The first was to support the personal well-being of the principals who chose to participate. The second was to foster relationships among the participating principals. And the third one, and the one that really connects with the goals of the Mental Health in Schools pilot project, was to give those principals the tools and confidence to shape safe, welcoming, caring, and inclusive school communities. And by embracing a co-design approach, we ensured that the learning we created together was relevant to the local context, while also building momentum for the project and building capacity to sustain the work beyond the duration of the grant. So our approach had 4 key elements to it. The first one was really looking at the universal approach to support the well-being of all the students and all the staff in the schools. So we've already spoken about the connection between student well-being and staff well-being. When teachers are well, it supports the mental health and well-being of their students. It supports student-teacher relationships. It supports learning outcomes for the students. And likewise, if teachers are experiencing burnout, we see increases in student stress and we see decreases in teaching quality. The same things apply when we look at the impact of principal well-being. When principals are well, it supports the well-being of teachers and all the staff in the school. It supports the well-being of students. It supports student learning outcomes, and it supports the overall well-being of the school. Principals, research from even before the pandemic was showing that principals are often very isolated within their role. The feeling of isolation, the pandemic exacerbated that. And research, especially coming out of Australia, shows that when principal well-being declines, their ability to lead the school effectively, to lead instruction within the school, and to shape that school climate declines as well. So to address this, we embraced a cohort model of learning. So by a cohort model focuses on building relationships, it focuses on bridging the theory to practice gap by providing opportunities for ongoing practice and reflection. And it really fosters the relationships that allow for learning from your peers, for strategic support, and seeing your peers as assets. And finally, embracing the co-design approach ensures that it's relevant, as I already mentioned. But more than that, it's about working with the people who are closest to the solutions, to prioritizing relationships, honesty, making sure people feel welcome, and using creative tools to build capacity. So we started with a small team and then grew out from there. Co-design learning has shown to foster the development of shared responsibility, of respect, of trust, and to create the conditions for collaborative learning, enhancing satisfaction and professional development. More so, it builds on the idea of involvement and influence. And in our research supporting workplace well-being, involvement and influence are key factors there. So we just integrated that throughout the project. So we went about the design in 2 phases. The first phase, which happened in the winter and spring of 2023, involved 4 full days of co-design with a facilitator. And we began with a small team of 6 principals, 3 from each of the 2 school divisions, as well as 1 administrative lead from each school division. Phase 2, which happened throughout the 2023-2024 school year, involved 6 full-day modules. We opened it up to any principals from either of the 2 school divisions who was interested in participating. We had 20 at the start of the year. And we also had our 2 school administrator leads or school division leads participating as well. Now, what I will mention is that we had a transition in the school admin leads. So this year, Karen and Lisa are our 2 school leads, or 2 divisional leads. However, they both started in their role last summer. So the result of that first phase created what you can see here on the screen. We wanted to ensure through our consultation in that design phase that the principals had an opportunity to experience personal well-being. So this is building on the idea of the being, knowing, doing framework. We wanted to give them the opportunity to develop authentic relationships with each other. We wanted to provide the opportunity to learn from experts on the topics that they identified. And we wanted to give them practice with community building tools that they could then take back and apply in their schools. The design team decided that the modules would be hosted in a different school each time. So each of the 6 members of the original design team hosted one of the 6 learning modules this year. And by hosting the modules in the schools, we could experience and celebrate the uniqueness of each school community. It also respects the day-to-day reality of a principal's work, and it further enhances the connections with the school community. So as you can see here on the screen, the 6 topics that are identified, we're building a common agenda. And how do you come together to work towards a shared goal with your school community? Creating compassionate learning experiences and building our skills to engage with conflict and challenging conversations. Looking at an ecosystem model to understand workplace well-being, school well-being. What are some of the root causes of dysfunction and how might we address those? Really looking at asset-based community development. What is working and building on that? Learning how to accelerate our impact to facilitate a culture of change in the schools. And then the final day was around the learning, the sharing and the celebration of the learning. So the principals presented a 3-minute thesis on what will foster leadership well-being within our system. So we wanted to bring the principals in. Of course, they're not joining us today, but we do have a couple of videos to share with you. So I'll get Rogan to put up the first video right now. This is one that I recorded with Klaus Hoekstra, you'll see on the screen, as part of a Stories of Success webinar. So if you can hit play, please, Rogan.
To join EdCan in co-designing a professional learning cohort to build principals' capacity to shape safe and caring schools. And we had 6 principals join this, 3 from our school division and 3 from another school division. And we journeyed along with Felicia. She led us through this conversation about generative dialogue. And it was challenging, difficult, and so rewarding. So we are currently in the 2nd year, and we've been working with some other principals through this generative dialogue. We've got 6 sessions. She's included some speakers that don't necessarily have that education background, but we've worked through the idea of building a common agenda, what it looks like for evaluation, what happens when there's conflict? How do we deal with that? But the most important part of it is the focus is about that leadership piece. As principals, it can sometimes be a lonely, difficult job. And maybe you've heard the statement, when the principal coughs, the school gets a cold. And I think there's some truth to that. If the principal is not doing well, how can they support others to do well? Mm-hmm. And I think as a principal, one of my #1 jobs is to support my staff, to be in the trenches with them when they're struggling, to celebrate the joys that they're having. And so the generative listening experience that we're doing right now has really given me that ability to grow as a principal in my understanding of my own wellness and how my wellness directly affects.
Excellent. So I'm just going to give you a moment to read this quote. It came from unsolicited from one of the principals just after the first session we hosted in October this year. And then we'll do the other video before I hand it over to Lisa to share some of the benefits and successes and impacts that she's witnessing. But before we do that, here is one example of the 3-minute thesis prepared by one of the principals.
A 3-minute thesis. 3 minutes to summarize a solution to leadership well-being and education in my school, in my staff, and in my own life. I have to admit, I tossed around the idea of graphs and data, not really my style, although I hold to the power of data. I tossed around the idea of just giving a word and then letting you figure out what it all meant. Risky, I would say. And so I summarized my learning over this past year this way. Why are we talking so much about mental health in schools? Teachers, students, and families are lacking healthy mental well-being. It's an epidemic. And as school leaders, we are surrounded by it. The National Library of Medicine completed a worldwide study of teachers. Over half of today's educators describe their mental health as not good. This 2022 study showed that burnout ranged as high as 74% with teachers. Stress was at 87% of teachers, and depression, 50% of teachers. So how can we overcome this? Healthy school leaders foster healthy school staff, and healthy school staff foster healthy students. My thesis can be summarized as say yes. Staff are encouraged and allowed to dream and grow when we say yes. Yes, try that. Yes, embrace that. Yes, collaborate. Yes, model. Yes, watch. Yes, listen. Yes, drop your shoulders and breathe. Students are transformed when we say yes. Yes, run and celebrate. Yes, take leadership. Yes, try that. Yes, you were made for that. Yes, work together. Model. Yes, watch. Yes, listen. Yes, drop your shoulders and do some bubble breathing. There aren't any easy answers to this epidemic, but I firmly believe that saying yes is powerful. When we say yes to a spiritual retreat, we find true meaning and rich blessing. We find that time with the living God really can transform. When we say yes to compromise and working together, we find common ground and celebration. We find freedom from our own biases and willingness to try. When we say yes to new, it creates a space to fail. We learn more, grow more, and participate in an environment where perfection is shed. Saying yes doesn't mean you know it all, but says, hey, let's figure it out. It sounds quaint and maybe cliche, but try it. Say yes as a leader. See how the team will step up and carry the load. See how the team will feel valued and like they can actually bring something to the table. See how saying yes will strengthen your mission. And so now I've finished with my own moment of yes from this year. It was an 11-year-old boy with ODD, a hurting child. We said, yes, come and stay with us. Actually, my husband said yes, and I'm learning from him. We found purpose in being called to this position of parenting when we kind of thought we were done and we really didn't know what we were doing. Don't put us on a pedestal because we're clueless. But that's the beauty and joy of saying yes. Don't say you could never do it, because remember, all of you have to do is say yes. The correlation to our need for systemic change is huge. With what I have, and sometimes it's not a lot, I'd love more staff, more money, more of what is out of my control. I'm committed to saying yes and seeing how small day-to-day changes can transform my school, and it is working.
So that was one example of a 3-minute thesis. We had about 15. It was hard to pick one to show you. There were conversations around generosity, social capital, building relationships. They were what each principal took away from the 6 days that we spent together this year was so valuable, and listening to their transformation was really powerful as well. Some of the other reflections from the principals in terms of being, knowing, doing. It is a time to pause, reflect, and reset for the next few weeks. Simply giving them a day with an agenda that allowed them to think deeply and interact and make connections with each other, helped them to be human beings instead of human doings, as Felicia said often this year. Knowing the ability to listen to others with wisdom and experience, connect with other men, and reflect on our current practices. I know early on this year, we had one of our speakers, Paul Bourne, said, we were talking about emails and how much they take up a person's day. He said, what if you just didn't answer them? And you could see the panic rising in everybody, but it led to a place where maybe they're not always so urgent. Maybe there is other important work we can be doing. Doing allows me to focus on how the way I interact with community and make sure I'm following the right path. So just some feedback directly from our principals. We do have some data to share, which was really interesting. So the data in one of the surveys we did, this was the first year. So how strongly do you agree with the following statement? I have a positive sense of personal well-being. So this first part is before the principals joined the generative listening experience. So you can say there was lots that agreed, some even strongly agreed, but there was a percentage that did not have a positive sense of personal well-being. Currently, you can see the shift. So of course, you know, statistically, there could have been other factors at play here, but we believe that the impact of our time together has increased wellness for our school leaders. How strongly do you agree with the following statement? I have a strong sense of community at work and feel connected to my peers in the workplace. So before joining, again, lots agreed. There were some that even strongly agreed, but we've got those people that disagreed. So that sense of feeling isolated and lonely is very concerning when you think of the impact a principal has on the wellness in their building. Currently, the strongly agree was the biggest shift. So a sense of community was very important for our principals. Last piece of data, which related to goal 3, giving principals the tools and confidence to shape safe, welcoming, caring, and inclusive communities in their schools. You can see before joining, again, lots of agreement, some even strongly agree. But again, we've got a percent that disagreed. You can see the shift after becoming a part of this cohort.
Lisa, before I dive in more on some of these insights and lessons learned, do you want to talk about some of your subjective observations of what you saw in the schools?
Yeah, for sure. You know, this idea of principal wellness seems like such a small, simple recipe for improved wellness. And I think that's the joy of this project, is that something like this can have a huge shift. We saw principals, you know, they'd come back to each of our division school leader meetings respectively, and you could see them shine in those meetings where prior they might have just been withdrawn. You could see their confidence in speaking up exploded, you know, leading some conversations in the school leader meetings. The days that we spent in each of the schools in Horizon and in Prairie Rose allowed the principals and the school staff and the students an opportunity to show off their buildings. And boy, every place we went did that happen. We had beautiful meals, lots of times made by parents in that community. We had students leading us on school tours, giving us, you know, I think we did a scavenger hunt one day on the school's assets. We did kind of an escape room with a school theme in one school, and the kids just, you know, in another school, we toured greenhouses, and the kids just loved touring these human beings around who they could show their school off to. It was just really great place to be, for sure.
I think it just echoes some of these other insights that we learned. So we are still sorting through the quantitative data that we have relating to this assurance data, but throughout the project, we knew that well-being is something that is very hard to measure quantitatively. So there's a lot of narrative insights. A 3-minute thesis is one way that we assessed and just understood what the principals were taking away from it. They kept thought books throughout the process. We captured video that we're going to be producing later on this month. Hopefully this month it'll be ready. And some of the insights relating to the 3 goals that we set out for the project is that well-being and mental health are human issues. We are human beings, we have a mind, therefore we can experience mental health. But beyond that, well-being is something that must be experienced. It is well-being. The term is not well-doing or well-knowing. So we made sure to design and facilitate each of the days to create space for participants to connect with each other. Well, they got to explore and test out different tools and strategies. Having a facilitator with a really deep level of warmth to be able to create that trust and positive energy within the room. And beginning each session slowly, the school tours that Lisa just spoke about, having time to connect and to check in with each other. And this was a strategy that we used in each of the sessions and that they have brought back into their school admin meetings. And it's having positive effects. When you know each other, you can get into the deep issues of a conversation much more easily. So really setting the tone by starting slowly with coffee and connection allowed for a deeper level of learning. Relating to goal 2 around fostering relationships amongst the participants, that one we nailed, creating the space to come together and holding the space for them. Relationships don't happen accidentally. As adults, we have to be intentional about building our relationships. And by bringing the principals together into a room for 6 days over the year, we were able to create that space and they can call on each other. They reach out to each other when they need support. Lisa and Karen, the 2 divisional leads who are on the project, I know they connect with each other around whatever's coming up. And the other part around the relationships was the lesson learned that allowing for self-selection. So because the climate in the room was critical for achieving the outcomes, forcing people into it was not the approach that was going to work. We wanted to allow people to be curious and to come. And the approach we took, starting small with a group of 6, and they would talk about it, how this is a different style of professional development, and that sparked curiosity and generated interest from other principals. And then that led to this larger group of 20 this year. And from what I've heard, there's people who aren't participating, who are really growing that curiosity. They're seeing what's happening. They're hearing how those principals talk about the experience and see and witness how they're showing up differently at admin meetings. So allowing for self-selection is a key part of creating the positive atmosphere for the learning environment. And then finally, relating to goal 3, giving people the tools and confidence to shape the healthy learning environment. So we know our education system is grappling with really big issues, the things that the education system's being asked to do, the amount of supports we're being asked to provide to our students, to our families, to our communities. We need to learn and develop our skills to handle and answer big questions like this. We know we need to lean into human-driven solutions. We are human beings. We need to connect with each other. And it's only by recognizing the humanity in whatever it is we're grappling with that we're going to come up with a solution that works. I mentioned before the decision to host the generative listening experience in schools allowed that opportunity to showcase the unique culture of each school and for the students, the staff, the principal to show their pride within that school. And then by creating this space, this container for the principals to practice with tools, there's a lot of pressure sometimes in education to have all the right answers. And Melissa alluded to that in her 3-minute thesis. But creating space to play and experiment allows you to figure it out before you have to take it back or choose to take it back if it's the right tool for your community. A couple of other insights throughout the process, having the support of the school authorities. So Lisa and Karen this year, their predecessors the year prior, as well as a lot of interest and support from the superintendents in the 2 school division. This was essential for making the project a success. And likewise, creating space for system leaders to explore possibilities like this, to learn together. There's a critical role. So if you're a superintendent, allowing for this to happen, creating those protected days for principals or others on your team to step outside their daily job to connect, reflect, and join together can have exponential impacts and benefits. So just to close this off, sometimes a change in perspective is necessary. And we do have a couple of questions that we came up with. How do you keep the momentum of a project like this going, knowing that budgets are a barrier? And in what ways can you engage school leaders in your division to focus on their own wellness and the impact on their school cultures? So Lisa, I will hand it back to you to close us out for the day. I know we only have a couple minutes left.
All right, thanks, Kathleen. We do have a couple of minutes left. So I know that Peace Wapiti had some questions for reflection, and Horizon Prairie Rose had some questions for reflection as well that we really didn't get a chance to talk about. So we do have a few minutes for any final thoughts, reflections, questions, feedback.
I guess I'll just give a reflection more than a question, is that there's a lot of cross-pollination of work that I heard today in the presentation. So I guess, Danica, one of my messages would be back to Cass is how do we continue this valuable work and continue to work together. So lots of really good things happening, but I see lots of opportunity for us to learn from one another going forward. So just a comment.
That's a great comment, Sean. Thank you. And I've heard that repeatedly and have been messaging that in any way that I can to Cass to see what continues in their conditional grant work next year. So stay tuned on that front. There may be more to come. I'm hoping into the next year that we can take this work to the next level. This is just a reminder that there is a Cass Perspective project about this topic that's been active since the beginning of this webinar series. So if you haven't had a chance to go there and add your ideas, please feel free to do so, or also go and read some of the ideas that were contributed, particularly during the Cass annual conference in March. There was a lot of engagement in this tool during that session as well. And on behalf of Cass, I would just like to extend my thanks and appreciation to all of the presenters this afternoon, and to Rogan Harper for being our tech support. And thank you to Lisa for hosting us this afternoon.